A shock in the dark.
Hello, narrator. My name is Anna, and I have a story for you that is so insane that even though it took place 15 years ago, it still doesn't seem like it's real. I was 18 when my mother gave me and my boyfriend plane tickets and hotel for a trip to Mexico. It's kind of a combo graduation and Christmas present. The only string attached? My mom wanted to go. Thank God she stayed in a separate hotel room at least. My boyfriend Nick was not a good person. He was really loud, had no inhibitions whatsoever, no shame. And I would like to use a way stronger word here, but let's just say he was a real jerk. Immature. That's probably the best word to describe him at that time. An immature, entitled brat. I was initially drawn to him for our commonalities. We met at school, at an event I organized for animal rights. Both of us were pot-smoking, barefoot, vegan, hippie fish fans, so we just connected. We had been together 4 years. In that time, we had graduated and started working in traditional 9-to-5 jobs. And while some relics of our past life remained, our commitment to veganism, for example, which was probably our strongest bond, remained the same. We did make some changes. We traded our hemp sandals for more sensible shoes, for example, so we could join a polite society. All the while, Nick never seemed like he was ready to grow up. Anyway, we were on this trip to Mexico and Mom wants us to go see an ancient Aztec pyramid. The biggest pyramid in the world. And Nick, of course, just complained and pouted and made me and Mom feel miserable the whole time. On the entire bus ride from the resort to the Aztec heritage site, he would do everything possible to demonstrate how miserable he was. He would sigh and cross his arms and kick his feet and kept saying things like, "We're in Mexico, for God's sake. I should be laying out by the pool with a margarita and some SPF 80. Honestly, while I was interested in the pyramid, I suppose I would rather be having fruity drinks by the pool too, but Mom had paid for everything and she was so excited about it. I just had to go with her. Besides, if I would have voiced any opposition, I would have never heard the end of it from Mom. In retrospect, that visit to the pyramid is where all of this really started. As we got off the bus and were introduced to our tour guide, I warned Nick not to ruin the afternoon by making a scene in front of my mother and the rest of the group. He rolled his eyes and groaned as we began the trek towards the temple. I listened and actually became engrossed with the tour guide's stories as he told us about the history of the Aztec Empire. You know, the culture, the costumes, the insanely advanced architecture. I found myself shockingly hanging on every word, and my mother and I were completely fascinated. When I eventually sneaked a peek over at Nick, he seemed almost angry that I dared to enjoy myself. Then, right in the middle of something the tour guide was saying, Nick blurted out in a loud voice, "I heard Aztecs were pretty effed up. Didn't they, do human sacrifices and eat babies and stuff?" I cringed, and I'm sure my face was bright red. The tour guide looked pissed, but he took a deep breath before saying something like, the Aztec believed that for life to continue for the many, a few had to make the ultimate sacrifice. Nick crossed his arms and said, "That's effed up, man. Sickos." The tour guide ignored him, and we just proceeded toward the temple. I shot Nick a dirty look while my mom looked like she wanted to crawl under a rock and hide. This enormous, flat-top pyramid towered over us, and I just couldn't help but be overwhelmed by it. It just radiated history. I'd never seen anything so old, ever. So while I'm having this religious experience, what is Nick doing? Well, as the tour guide fell back, allowing us to explore freely, Nick grabbed my elbow and dragged me around the corner. "Is this thing almost over?" he said. "I need to pee." I told him I didn't know, but trying to stay nice and positive, I said, "Okay, look, go pee. Take a walk around. I'm sure you can find somewhere." Honestly, I was just looking forward to getting a break from Nick actively ruining our trip, but Nick didn't go anywhere. He suddenly got this evil look that I unfortunately knew so well and said, "Great idea, Anna." And then to my horror, he unzipped his pants and began to pee right there on the corner of this amazing, ancient, religious structure. Of course, I walked off, disgusted. The remainder of the tour went on much in the same way until finally we boarded the bus back to the resort. "Well, that was a blast," Nick said sarcastically. "I loved learning about a bunch of idiot cannibals all day. How about you?" I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to speak to him. I was so angry and felt so bad for my mom. That night, I was exhausted, so Nick and I just ordered dinner for the room. He called room service and ordered my vegan meal, and then I was shocked when I became aware that Nick was ordering a hamburger, a rare hamburger. You know, all that talk of eating people actually has me craving something a little bloodier. I sat there dumbfounded. Nick hadn't eaten meat in over 7 years. It went against his principles to hurt any living thing. He finally just looked at me and said, "I have a craving. What can I say?" When the burger came, I watched with disgust as Nick ate every single bloody bite. The remainder of the trip was just as uncomfortable as that day, and by the time we were flying back home to the Midwest, I was ready to leave Mexico, the Aztecs, and the memories of Nick's juvenile jerk behavior. I was looking forward to getting back to a routine. I just wanted to forget about the whole trip. We landed, grabbed a car from the airport parking lot, and started home. Nick stopped over at the grocery store to get some dinner supplies. He parked, ran into the store, and returned a few minutes later with a paper bag, which he plopped in my lap. I peeked inside. The entire bag was just stacked with thick-cut steaks. "What the hell is this?" I said, shoving the bag off my lap onto the floor. Come on, don't be dramatic, Anna. I just felt like making some steaks, okay?" "We don't eat meat, Nick." "Well, tonight I do." I felt anger bubbling beneath the surface of my skin. We got home and Nick piled the steaks into the otherwise empty fridge, and I just went to bed. I woke up sometime later in the dead of night. I was groggy and parched and jet-lagged. Nick was not in bed. Confused and disoriented, I stumbled out of the bedroom and down the hall towards the kitchen for a glass of water. I kept looking around the dark rooms for any sign of Nick, but he wasn't there. When I reached the kitchen, I saw Nick. He was a silhouette in the dim light of the open refrigerator. He was chewing loudly, violently. I knew exactly what was happening immediately. "Nick?" I said. Nick suddenly swung around. His eyes were huge and crazy. In both hands he was gripping tightly raw and bleeding gobs of steak. He looked like a crazy person, and I just started dry heaving at the sight of him wolfing down these giant chunks of bloody tissue while the juices dribbled down his chin and were smearing all over his face. Then there was the sound of ripping muscle tissue, the smacking and licking of the juices, the giant gobs of meat barely able to fit down his throat being gulped down to a point of almost choking. But that wasn't even the worst part. It was his stomach churning loudly with gases and juices as It tried in vain to digest this onslaught of raw meat, and the sight of Nick's distended belly, packed to obviously dangerous levels, where it looked like his intestines may explode at any moment. Nick had consumed every last piece of meat in the refrigerator. I ran to the bathroom to be sick. Nick called out after me, but I didn't care to listen. I locked myself in the bathroom and slept in the tub until sunrise. Then, as Nick slept, his face and hands still covered with blood and his body smelling of putrid raw meat, I packed a bag and left. I didn't see Nick again after that night. My mother moved my things out of the apartment for me one day while Nick was at work. I found my own place shortly after. Our relationship had been unraveling for a while, but this disgusting display was all I could take. I used to go out to dinner with friends, and it didn't bother me one bit when they ordered a dish with meat. But ever since that one night, I can't watch anybody eat a piece of meat without being sick. The story doesn't end there, though. It was about 10 years later, December of 2016, actually, when I'm a married woman, still a vegan, with a lovely daughter, living hundreds of miles away in Biloxi, Mississippi, with my husband. And Nick not ever crossing my mind, until everything suddenly came rushing back to me when I saw his face on the news. I've attached a copy of the news article because I knew how crazy all this sounds, but there I am flipping through the channels, drinking a glass of wine when Nick's mugshot flashed across the screen. I almost dropped a full glass of red wine on a white sofa. That's when the anchorman says,
An Oklahoma man has been charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, and police say charges of illegal dissection of a human body are also possible, but point out that cannibalism, in and of itself, is not illegal in the United States.
Can you believe that? Eating a person isn't against the law? The news said Nick allegedly lured his victims to his home, where he bludgeoned them and dissected them and eventually cooked and consumed them. Horrified is not powerful enough of a word to describe what I felt. You'll see in the article, Nick was tried and found guilty on all counts. He received 3 life sentences without parole. He's going to be in jail to the day he dies, and I can't say it isn't what he deserves. But I can't make sense of why Nick did the things he did. What would drive a man to kill and eat another human being? All I could think about when I saw his face on the news was the last night I saw him, standing in the light of the refrigerator. I no longer think he ate that raw meat to frighten me anymore. I remember the look in his eyes when he turned his face to me. I am sure that what I saw in his eyes was shame. He was full of shame. I don't believe in the supernatural. I wouldn't even consider myself to be spiritual anymore. I use reason to find explanations, but in this case, there's no conclusion to be made. Were I a different person, the hippie flower child I used to be, I might think that our trip to the Aztec temple and Nick's disrespect somehow played a part in all of this, but I feel foolish even entertaining the idea. All I know is that the vegan I once knew somehow, some way, got a taste for meat. A taste so powerful that it was insatiable. Some kind of obsession, to where that night in our kitchen, he had stuffed himself full to a painful, dangerous level. What could possess a person who is a vegan to suddenly need to choke down chunk after chunk of raw, bleeding meat? What possessed him? Mr. Shock, I don't know if this fits into what you do, but I enjoy the way you do your show, and I'd love to hear my story done the same way. I'll start by saying this. I believe that a man's connection with the earth is the third most important relationship in his life, only superseded by the relationship he has with God and the relationship he has with his mother. I was raised in a rural town in the Appalachian region where the glory of nature is something you feel in your bones. Growing up, there wasn't a time I wasn't playing in the woods, fishing in the creek or my grandpa's catfish pond, hiking or camping in the mountains, but my favorite activity is and has always been hunting. I know some people don't like the idea of it, and I respect that, but for me, there's something so primal about it. It's a dynamic played out since the beginning of time. Predator versus prey. I understand some people unfamiliar with the sport may find it strange to express a love of nature by killing a living thing, but for what it's worth, I take great care in utilizing every bit of the animal that sacrificed its life to me. It fulfills its purpose this way, the cycle of life coming to its natural conclusion. Some people don't get it, but, and my grandpa taught me this, there's no victory in hunting without admiration for the adversary. When I hunt, I feel grounded, powerful, alive. However, my story is about the one and only time where it felt off and where I felt unsafe. It was one year when deer season was coming to an end. I got a late start that day and may not have even bothered going out at all, but I was just about to lose my last chance, so I loaded up the truck and drove up the mountain to one of my favorite spots. It's a remote stretch of woods that's been in my family since my great-great-grandparents settled it. I loved it because there was always game up there, and it was a great place to just be alone. Nobody around for miles and miles. A place where it's just you and the natural world. I parked on the shoulder of the gravel road and, gun in hand, broke through the tree line. That's when I get it. This amazing calm that just rushes over you, and you just breathe in these deep breaths of fresh mountain air. I imagine myself not too unlike a lion stalking a gazelle. Here, I am the apex predator. My confidence aside, the hunt was a complete bust. I lingered as long as I could, hoping to cross paths with some unlucky, unsuspecting buck. I was for sure going to come home with a prize that day, and I was so confident that I did something very out of the ordinary for me. I stayed past the last minutes of daylight. I hadn't brought any of the proper equipment to hunt at night, so I flipped on my single, small, portable light and started off on the long hike back to the truck, empty-handed. The woods were dark as pitch. Only the occasional rustling of tiny creatures in the brush broke the otherwise complete silence. Now, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I feel the hairs on the back of my neck start to stand up on end. I'd done this hunting trip 1,000 times in this exact spot. There had never been no reason to be afraid. But they say people have got this sixth sense, like an instinct, a gut feeling from time to time. My mind told me everything's normal. The hairs on my neck and arms told me something was amiss. I picked up my pace. As I retraced my path back, my flashlight glanced across a strange track I'd never seen before. I bent down to take a closer look. It was a human footprint, and it was fresh, and it was not mine. But check it out. It was much smaller than any adult foot. The person it belonged to was going barefoot, and it looked like they'd been walking on the sides of their feet. I'm like, what the hell? I certainly had not seen hide nor hair of another person in these parts. I didn't see or hear any vehicles. This was making me feel a bit anxious, so I just kept moving forward and kept my eyes trained on the forest floor. As I walked on, I began to realize the footsteps seemed to follow mine. Like as I entered the forest earlier that day, right behind each of my large footprints, stamped in the mud, were the smaller, shallower steps of somebody barefoot walking on the sides of their feet. Now, there's just no way somebody had been there, going unnoticed, with my senses all being heightened while I hunted. I'll tell you what, the more I thought about it, the more I started to feel hot beneath the collar. Now I was practically jogging back to the truck. I kept shining that tiny flashlight around, hoping to catch a glimpse of this odd little culprit. You best believe I kept my gun clutched in my hand, ready to go. Because I was all discombobulated, and in a hurry I stumbled across one of the big old gnarled up tree roots and fell face first in the dirt. Man, I felt so foolish. I clambered to my feet with all the grace of a newborn foal, and then it hit me. I no longer felt the confidence of an apex predator. That feeling had been replaced, and for the first time in my life, I knew what it was like to feel like prey. And that's when the flashlight lit up something weird on this old chestnut oak tree. I stepped up to get a closer look, and I could tell that somebody had cut some little notches into the trunk. And recently, I ran my fingers across the cuts, and they were just oozing with sap, and you could smell it. This was fresh. It was then that I realized that the grooves cut into this tree were words. I felt like I was going to pass out, like I was the star of my own horror show. I got that little flashlight real close to that tree and squinted real good, trying to make out what it said, when I finally solved the puzzle. I kid you not, the words carved on that tree said, "I am watch you. I am watch you." Never before have I read 4 creepier words strung together. I hauled ass. I was like a startled deer hightailing it through them woods, like a big, uncoordinated toddler, running through briars, jumping over bushes. My heart was pounding against my ribs. And something was telling me, "Don't do it, Billy. Don't you turn around to look. I know you want to, but trust me, you just got to get out of here." Just when I felt like my legs were about to give out, I stumbled out of the forest onto that little gravel road, and I said a thank you Jesus prayer as I jumped into the truck and locked the doors and cranked the engine all at one time. I'm telling you, my hands were shaking so bad I thought I might not be able to steer, but I turned that truck around, and as I did, my headlights, for just the briefest moment, crossed over something standing there in those woods. I have no idea what this was, and it may have just been the panic combined with the dim light, but when I think about it in hindsight, in my mind, it looks like a tiny, completely naked, like 3 or 4 foot tall elderly man, like really wrinkled up, just standing there past the tree line staring at me. Now, all this took place some years ago, and I still love to hunt, but I will admit, I have not returned to that portion of our property since all this happened. I am still highly embarrassed by being so frightened as I was that day back in the woods. I'm supposed to be some kind of manly man, but I felt like a tiny child that day. But I'll tell you what, I did learn something. And maybe if you believe in this sort of thing, maybe there was a purpose to all this. I learned that night that pride is blinding. Pride cometh before a fall. And while nature is absolutely beautiful, it can also be cruel and violent and full of pain. But more than anything else, the thing that became clear to me is nobody is always the predator. Even the most skilled and best equipped predator can become the prey. I would like to make an apology to you, Mr. Narrator, but mostly I want to apologize to anybody who's ever sent their story into this show. The embarrassing truth is, I thought all of you had to be either crazy or liars. There was no way any of these stories were true. I would listen and I'd try to figure out which stories were by liars and which ones were by crazy people. Either way, all the stories were 100% made up, I was sure of it. Then it happened. The most bizarre, most unexplainable thing I could ever imagine. Life certainly has a way of spanking you when you need it. Here's what happened. I live in a large city with a pretty good transportation system, so I don't even own a car. Instead, I take the bus to work every day. I've been working from home while my offices were closed due to COVID, but my building just reopened for business, so I headed down to the bus stop on Monday for the first time in about 2 years. When I get to the bus stop, there's only one other person there. There's an elderly woman. I'm guessing she's 80 or 90 years old, and she's seated on the bench at the stop. I sit down next to her, and almost immediately, I get this really weird feeling. Not a bad feeling. It was a warm feeling. The best way I can describe it is probably a little controversial, but it is what it is. The feeling reminded me of the time I broke my leg in 2 places and I was put on a morphine drip. It was this warm sense of well-being that filled me inside from the ends of my toes to the top of my head. Really nice. Very comforting. Suddenly, if this makes any sense at all, was a passenger in my own body. I could still feel everything, smell everything, still taste, see, and think. However, I was not in control of anything. My body turned to face the woman, and my mouth opened, and words were coming out of my mouth, and there was nothing I could do about it. All I could do was watch what was happening. I watched myself as I say, "Oh, Millie, you are as beautiful as ever, more beautiful than you were in your wedding dress." The woman turned to look at me in the eyes. I thought she was going to freak out. Her face suddenly relaxed, though, and it softened, and she said, "Tony, it is you. Oh, Tony, I miss you every day." Then, I just say one more thing. Or, I hear myself say one more thing. I say, "I miss you. Whenever you think of me, I am here with you." And that was it. As soon as I finished saying that sentence, I was back. I just stood there with my mouth hanging open. I didn't know what to say. I just said, "I'm sorry," and I walked away. I missed my bus. I guess I was just in some kind of stupor. Obviously, I have no way to explain what happened there. How can you be taken over by a ghost? Have you ever heard of this? Because I have not.